Born in 1900, her birthday alone destined this child to be a woman of her century. But as she grew up, fate played its part, and so did her own remarkable character. Never in her childish fantasies could she have foreseen that she would be crowned Queen Consort in Westminster Abbey, that her elder daughter would become Queen Elizabeth II. It was a chance meeting with the Duke of York, second son of King George V, that transformed her life. The Duke first met her in 1905 at a children's Christmas party, and next at a ball in 1920. Thanks to that encounter, Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, youngest daughter and ninth child of the 14th Earl of Strathmore, was wooed and eventually wed by George, Duke of York. Riding in state to Westminster Abbey, the first prince to be married there since Richard II 541 years earlier, the Duke of York could never have guessed that one day he would make the same journey with Elizabeth on the way to be crowned. The marriage ceremony was to have been broadcast on the fledgling BBC wireless service, but the plans were abandoned on the grounds that among the listeners might be vulgar people, men in public houses wearing cloth caps. In 1923, royalty and aristocracy still inhabited a close-knit and privileged world. So when it came to the splendor of the royal wedding, Elizabeth was accustomed to the deference accorded to the ruling class. She slipped easily into the royal lifestyle with its opulence and grandeur and cheering crowds. Although she was unknown to the public at large, Elizabeth's beauty and charm had been noticed in the rarefied social circle in which she moved. As a debutante, she'd been much in demand on the aristocratic marriage market, but even so, a royal prince was a considerable capture. And when she emerged onto the balcony of Buckingham Palace, it was the opening of a real-life fairy tale that would bring her back to make many similar appearances in very different circumstances in the years to come. From the very beginning, Elizabeth brought something fresh and different to public life. She was, after all, the first commoner to marry a second in line to the throne since James II married Anne Hyde. And although she was in no way common, she did seem to have the common touch. The royal couple enjoyed the traditional pastimes of their class, and it was noted with approval they did not mix with the farce set around the Prince of Wales. It was during this time that Elizabeth became known as the Litle Duchess, and her small, smiling figure became a familiar and popular feature at public events. Horse racing was an interest she shared with millions. And the Duke of York showed that he too had a lighter touch when he took up speedboat racing. In these historic pictures taken at the Thames Yacht Club Regatta, Elizabeth is seen with King George V, who was apparently very fond of her and warmly supported her marriage to his son. The king, of course, had a passion for sailing. And in those days, the Britannia really was a yacht, a great sailing yacht, that was taken out to sea and scuppered when the king died. It was increasingly noticed that Elizabeth brought to her duties an unusual and unexpected sense of enjoyment. With no one to teach her how formal she was expected to be, she did what came naturally. And the public responded with warmth and enthusiasm. Keep an eye on the nurses in this newsreel. They worked at the Seamen's Hospital in Greenwich, and this was the opening in 1929. When the Little Duchess departed, the nurses mobbed the motorcade. What would Queen Victoria have thought? Laying foundation stones is one of those tedious royal duties. But according to the Times, even foundation stones were laid by Elizabeth as though she had just discovered a new and delightful way of passing an afternoon. At another formal occasion, at St. James's Palace garden party, the guests were not in the least in awe of their royal hostess. She clearly put them at their ease. Among her appointments, the Litle Duchess was patron of the Mothercraft Training Centre, and coming as she did from a large and happy family background, it was to be expected that she would soon be starting her own family. In 1926, she quietly withdrew from public life, and very few were aware she'd become pregnant. Her first child, Elizabeth, would one day be queen. And further cause for loyal toasts when the birth of a second daughter at Glamis Castle brought the crowds into the streets in the little town close to the Earl of Strathmore's ancestral home. It was Elizabeth's special wish to have her second baby, to be christened Margaret Rose, at Glamis Castle, and the King gave special permission for the royal birth to occur in Scotland. The enthusiastic celebrations ended with a large crowd climbing nearby Hunter's Hill to light a great beacon. This warmth of feeling displayed in Scotland towards Elizabeth is still clearly evident, and the feeling is reciprocated. Among many happy memories of Glamis and of Scotland, this must be one of the most vivid. The golden wedding celebrations of Elizabeth's mother and father, the Earl and Countess of Strathmore. It was here at Glamis Castle that Elizabeth spent a very happy, if sheltered, childhood. And it's in this kind of social circle that she's always felt most at home. It may well be that the idyllic years spent here at the heart of a large and loving family laid the foundations of her own strong and devoted marriage. Certainly, the image of a young and happy couple and two charming little princesses was becoming well established in the press and in the public's perception of this royal duke. It was all in total contrast to the somewhat raffish persona presented by his older brother, Edward, the heir to the throne.
Before Mother and Dad took her home in the pram, just like you and I.
It's impossible to imagine Edward, Prince of Wales, getting involved in youth work, as his younger brother did. Here at New Romsey, the Duke of York established annual holiday camps for boys from rich and poor homes. He and the Duchess made a point of spending a couple of days every year with the young factory apprentices and the public schoolboys at the Duke of York's camps. The Duke, despite a painful stammer that made him shy, shared camp activities and joined in the sing-song. But for the Duke and his family, these carefree days were numbered. Such innocent pleasures would play all too small a part in the turbulent and unexpected course of events triggered by the death of the King.
Again the sad procession is formed, smaller than that which moved through the London streets, but still magnificently impressive, as the King of England walks behind his dead father, and the sorrowing Queen rides in the slow-moving carriage.
And the new king was, of course, Edward, Prince of Wales. Throughout the Roaring Twenties, he'd been a fashionable and popular figure, but questions lingered about his suitability and preparedness for kingship. His father, whose hearse he now followed, would have preferred his younger son, the Duke of York, to succeed him, had that been possible. But the Constitution demanded that the Prince of Wales succeed to the throne, and so he did.
Once again, Friary Court is the scene of magnificent medieval ceremonial, as the Garter King of Arms prepares to proclaim the date of the coronation.
by the King a proclamation declaring His Majesty's pleasure touching his royal coronation and the solemnity thereof. Edward R.I.
Even as the city, the nation, the Commonwealth, and the Empire acclaimed the new king, there were those who knew that his own father had predicted that he would ruin himself within 12 months of being crowned. But the machine of state rolled on, and the new king was undoubtedly popular.
As Prince of Wales, His Majesty the King came to be known abroad as the super salesman of the British Empire. So zealously did he work for the cause of better and bigger markets for British and imperial goods. So what could be more fitting than that his first public function as king should be to visit the 1936 British Industries Fair.
But even as the new King Edward VIII went about his duties, try as he might, he had other things on his mind. Above all, his obsession with the American divorcee, Wallis Simpson. He was determined to marry Wallis as king if he could, and he clearly thought it possible. After all, he was the most popular member of the royal family there had ever been, and he wrongly thought that he could therefore overcome the establishment in his determination to wed Wallis.
The Australian stand is for 20,000 cans of tinned rabbit for sale to West African natives.
Today, the American press is filled with rumors of royal romance, of the possibility of King Edward marrying Mrs. Wallis Simpson, the former Baltimore belle. Yesterday, as a girl, she lived in Maryland in this quiet and humble Baltimore home. Tomorrow, she may dwell in Buckingham Palace. King Edward and Mrs. Simpson have been pictured together on many occasions, and in this topsy-turvy world, it may be time for an American woman to marry a British king. Here is a rare Pathé News picture of Edward and Wally leaning from their box, second from right, at the Grand National before she became the most talked-of woman in the world. We repeat the picture so you can see Edward step back to give Wally a better view of the race.
A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor. And now that I have been succeeded by my brother, the Duke of York, my first words must be to declare my allegiance to him. This I do with all my heart.
"1936 was an astonishing year, a year that was to see no less than 3 monarchs on the throne, and the third was to be George, Duke of York, King George VI, who rode with his wife Elizabeth to be crowned in Westminster Abbey. With the coronation, the new Queen Consort was now faced with daunting responsibilities. She must support the king, a shy man hampered by his stammer, in reviving the fortunes of the monarchy. She and the king had inherited an empire and its peoples profoundly shocked by the abdication. To recover the trust and love and credibility was a public relations exercise that brought out the best in the new Queen Consort. She is blessed with a magnificent and regal bearing, and from the very beginning, she seemed to bear lightly the burden of the crown. Although she was a commoner, the mantle of royalty appeared to rest easily upon Elizabeth. But only she can have known how heavily it fell upon the king. One wonders if she believed, as others do, that George VI's premature death may have been due to the stress that came with the accession. He had never expected and never wanted to be king. But matters would have been desperate without the support of his consort. The glamour and charisma that increasingly surrounded her helped restore affection for the royal family in the years to come. The pictures now fed to the public of their new king and queen firmly emphasized what are now called family values. They were presented as loving, unpretentious, and almost middle class in their tastes and pastimes. Feeding the ducks in the park with corgis in attendance was a reassuring image after all the scandal and intrigue that accompanied the abdication. They were nice people doing a proper job and taking it seriously. As the 1930s drew to a close and the likelihood of war with Germany became ever more threatening, Elizabeth took on an increasing number of public duties, leaving the king free to perform what were considered more urgent tasks.
This ceremony, to which many thousands have looked forward so eagerly, must now take place in circumstances far different from those for which they had hoped. I have, however, a message for you from the King. He bids the people of this country to be of good cheer, in spite of the dark clouds hanging over them, and indeed over the whole world. The launching of a ship is like the inception of all great human enterprises, an act of faith. We cannot foretell the future, but in preparing for it, we show our trust in a divine providence and in ourselves. We proclaim our belief that by the grace of God and by man's patience and goodwill, order may yet be brought out of confusion and peace out of turmoil. Queen Elizabeth.
As she comes off the end of the slipway, watch her dive down and recover.
Even as the great liner was launched, German U-boats began to threaten the shipping lanes of the North Atlantic. Something else to take into account as the King and Queen faced their first major official overseas tour. They were to visit Canada and the United States.
To the capital of the Dominion, to the city of waters above the Ottawa River, come our King and his gracious Queen. Because of the delays crossing the Atlantic, the visit to Ottawa has been cut from 3 days to 2. But what days they are! The regal splendor of the old world in a new world setting. The King visits Canada's famous Parliament building to give personal assent to new laws, a unique ceremony. The following day, the Queen lays the foundation stone of the new Supreme Court building. She taps the stone with a golden trowel. And then, before high officials of Canada and thousands of her people, she shakes hands with the stonemason who helped her. And as Canada's Prime Minister, Mr. Mackenzie King, bows towards her, the Queen moves to the microphones to speak on the place of woman in the modern world.
Perhaps it is not inappropriate that this task should be performed by a woman. For a woman's position in civilized society has depended upon the growth of law.
most moving ceremony of all in the great square before the Parliament building is the unveiling of Canada's memorial to her war dead, a lasting symbol of the unity that bound the Empire in 1914 and binds it still. And His Majesty's words ring out loud and clear, a message to the world.
Not by chance do the crowning figures of peace and freedom appear side by side. Peace and freedom cannot long be separated. Without freedom, there can be no enduring peace, and without peace, no enduring freedom.
There follows the most amazing scene of the tour, a scene unique in modern history. Suddenly and unexpectedly, Their Majesties break away from their attendants and cross the road to the ex-servicemen. For a few moments, they're completely swallowed up in a swirling mass of loyal subjects. Perhaps never before have the King and Queen won so completely the heart of a mighty crowd.
The first ever royal walkabout came as a total surprise. Whether it was planned or spontaneous, it was hugely successful.
At last the way is cleared for the royal car, but Their Majesties are still standing. A scene that will surely live forever in their memory and in the memory of Canada.
On to the United States, where the King and Queen met President Roosevelt and America's First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. This state visit was of special importance in helping to cement the special relationship between Britain and the United States. The King and Queen were here to strengthen ties and try to ensure American support in the event of war. There were those who thought the King too shy and inexperienced to carry out such a difficult act of statesmanship. But with the help of the Queen, the royal visit was judged to have been an unqualified success. And the royal party returned to a tumultuous welcome. The warmth of the reception they'd received by the uninhibited transatlantic crowds seemed to inspire their subjects at home. And the King had returned with fresh ideas about the style of the monarchy. He wanted to make it more human and accessible. And to prove it, he once more attended the youth camp he'd founded as Duke of York.
And so say all of us, and so say all of us, and so say all of us, for he's a jolly good fellow. He's a jolly good fellow, and so say all of us.
And after that, it's the camp sing-song.
In 1939, for the King and Queen and the princesses to attend an occasion like this was a total break with tradition. As the King admitted, in my father's day, certain things just couldn't be done.
Under the spreading chestnut tree.
On my knee, oh, how happy I should be under the if I on my if I on my.
In a society that was still stuffy, snobbish and class-ridden, the royal family were not supposed to join in such innocent fun. But very soon the King and Queen would be drawn closer to their subjects in very different circumstances, and the laughter was to cease.
The responsibility lies on the shoulders of one man. By his latest act of naked aggression, Hitler has committed a crime not only against Poland, but against the whole human race. Against the mothers and children leaving the cities of Britain under the great evacuation scheme with a smoothness and speed that avoids a single accident or delay. As they start out on what to them is the great adventure, already German troops, guns and planes have crossed the Polish border to kill and to destroy. So Britain prepares to fight, and never in our history have we been so united in the knowledge that our cause is just.
The last time that I broadcast a message was at Halifax, Nova Scotia, when I said a few words of farewell to all the women and children who had welcomed the King and myself so kindly during our visits to Canada and the United States of America. I speak today in circumstances sadly different. For 20 years, we have kept this day of remembrance as one consecrated to the memory of past and never to be forgotten sacrifice. And now the peace which that sacrifice made possible has been broken, and once again we have been forced into war. Many of you have had to see your family life broken up, your husband going off to his allotted task, your children evacuated to places of greater safety. The King and I know what it means to be parted from our children, and we can sympathize with those of you who have bravely consented to this separation for the sake of your little ones. Equally, do we appreciate the hospitality shown by those of you who have opened your homes to strangers and to children sent from places of special danger.
Her Majesty goes down to the country to see how London's evacuated children are getting along. She finds them healthy, happy, and above all, extremely busy. With the Minister of Education, Lord Delaware, Her Majesty makes a tour of the village. Better look behind you, Sonny, there's the Queen coming down the garden path. And Sonny has only just realized it. In the village hall, the Queen sees other children at play, and one little lady has many questions to ask the royal visitor on the best ways of stringing beads. And the Queen finds another little girl bathing her... Oh, excuse me, about those beads. The Queen finds another little girl bathing her dolly and reminds her not to forget to wash behind the ears. And those beads... You know, washing behind the ears is very important. Twice a week, the Queen joins the ladies in the blue drawing room of Buckingham Palace, the magnificent apartment which was once the ballroom of Queen Victoria. The ladies are members of the palace staff, and these twice-weekly meetings are Her Majesty's idea to work for the Red Cross or do knitting for the troops.
So effective was the Queen in mobilizing Britain's war effort that Hitler was to describe her as the most dangerous woman in Europe.
There's a complete absence of formality. It's just a job to be done, an example to us all of the way to win a war.
Meanwhile, on the French Riviera, there was another cause for concern. The former king, now the Duke of Windsor, and his new wife were leading a very public life in outrageous contrast to the growing austerity at home. While in Britain, the King and Queen helped to brace national resolve against a possible invasion, the Windsors danced the night away, and, it said, gave comfort to the enemy. Among the smart set in which the Windsors moved, there were rumours of their contacts with the Nazis and of his fascist leanings. It was all very worrying. And while on the Côte d'Azur they celebrated with fireworks, London was about to experience a far less joyful display of pyrotechnics. The phony war became a real and bloody war. The Battle of Britain had commenced. For weeks on end, from August 1940, our cities experienced intense bombing raids. They called it the Blitz. Bristol, Birmingham, Coventry, Plymouth all suffered. And, of course, London. In just 2 weeks, 10,000 civilians were killed or injured, and thousands were made homeless. Throughout the Blitz, the King and Queen shared London's agony. Indeed, Buckingham Palace was hit several times. Now, said the Queen, we can look the East End in the face.
A protective screen of sandbags covers the spot where a delayed action bomb has fallen outside Buckingham Palace. After the explosion, some hours later, a gaping crater is made between the palace and the Victoria Memorial. By this further deliberate attack on the lives of our King and Queen, when 5 bombs fell on and around the palace, the home of our beloved sovereign and his consort is again damaged. 1 bomb crashed through the Queen's drawing room, while others fell in the quadrangle. Within a few yards from where the King and Queen were sheltering, the royal chapel was struck. Tearing through the roof, the bomb completely wrecked the altar and hurled 20 tons of debris into the basement. We thank God that their majesties were unhurt. But swift vengeance strikes at the black-hearted raider. A few seconds later, a Nazi plane was seen to break in pieces, crashing within a short distance of Buckingham Palace. Thus ended the murderous attack on what the twisted Nazi mind called a military objective. May this planned attempt at assassination recoil 100-fold on the beast of Berlin. To Fulham, their majesties bring a cheery word, and the Queen especially a friendly smile. As they walk with difficulty among the wreckage, they're greatly moved by the wanton havoc wrought by the Hun. At intervals, the royal party halt to have a word with ARP workers, demolition squads and firemen who've done such splendid work at so great a risk. And the Queen smiles again as she insists on shaking the hand of a worker who apologizes for its griminess. Having had their own home bombed, their majesties speak with understanding and sympathy to those of their subjects who have also fallen victims to Nazi savagery.
I would like, first of all, to tell you just why I am speaking to you tonight. To you, my fellow countrywomen all over the world. It is not because any special occasion calls for it. It is not because I have any special message to give you. It is because there is something that deep in my heart I know ought to be told you, and probably I am the best person to do it. How often, when I have talked with women engaged on every kind of job, sometimes a physically hard or dangerous one, how often, when I admired their pluck, have I heard them say, "Oh well, it's not much. I'm just doing my best to help us win the war." And have you not met that enemy too? You have endured his bombs. You have helped to put out the fires that he has kindled in our homes. You have tended those he has maimed, brought strength to those he has bereaved. Many there are whose homes have been shattered by the fire of the enemy. The dwellings can be rebuilt, but nothing can restore the family circle if a dear one has gone forever from it. The King and I are grateful to think that we and our family are remembered in your prayers. We need them and try to live up to them. And we also pray that God will bless and guide our people in this country and in our great family throughout the empire, and will lead us forward united and strong in the paths of victory and peace.
The royal family set off from Sandringham House to inspect the splendid crops being harvested on the King's estate in Norfolk. A governor's cart and 3 bicycles are used to travel around the many hundreds of acres of Sandringham Park, now growing food for the nation. Princess Margaret and Princess Elizabeth have an inherent love for the country life. The extensive work which has transformed the Sandringham estate has been carried out with the keen personal interest and support of the King and Queen.
"Dig for victory" was the slogan which the royal family endorsed when they ploughed up the royal estates and gardens to grow food. Throughout the war years, the way the King and Queen identified with the everyday problems of their subjects helped establish George VI as the people's king.
Combine harvesters are bringing in the harvest. Farm workers are helped here by land girls in the busy work of reaping.
But it was the solidarity of the whole royal family, their unaffected devotion to each other, that helped establish Queen Elizabeth and the princesses as the darlings of the nation. Never were her finer qualities better in evidence than during the war years. She'd kept her family together and helped to hold the nation together, and the dark days were about to come to an end.
The Queen seats herself in the governor's cart, takes the reins from Mr. French, the Queen's groom, who has been in the service of the royal family since the reign of Queen Victoria, and leads the family tour of inspection a stage further. Behind her come the princesses and the king.
The Queen and I know of the ordeals which you have endured throughout the Commonwealth and Empire. We are proud to have shared some of them with you. And we know also that we shall all face the future together.
Despite the best efforts of his speech therapist over many years, when the king told the nation the war was over, he was almost silenced by his stammer. He was clearly tired and perhaps already ill.
There is great comfort in the thought that the years of darkness and danger in which the children of our country have grown up are over. Please God, forever. To that end, let us turn our thoughts on this day of just a triumph.
On the 8th of May 1945, when the official announcement of the Allied victory was made, great crowds converged on Buckingham Palace. The event was not orchestrated or organized. It was a spontaneous expression of joy and gratitude. A multitude of deliriously happy people called for the King and Queen.
Outside Buckingham Palace, the crowds cheered themselves hoarse. 7 times during VE Day, the royal family appeared on the balcony.
We went out 8 times during the afternoon and evening, noted the king. We were given a great reception. Sometimes the Prime Minister appeared with the royal family. Mr. Churchill later remarked, "Perhaps at no time in history has the British nation been more united and the popularity of the royal family greater than it was on VE Day 1945.
Keeping watch is a man who led Englishmen to victory against an earlier tyrant. His column stands at the very center of the great British Commonwealth of Nations. Crowds swelled below him in a riot of rejoicing by day and night.
During the evening, the 2 princesses were allowed to slip out of the palace accompanied by their governess and their uncle and mingle with the crowds. They too danced in the streets and later stood outside the palace calling for the King and Queen and singing Land of Hope and Glory. By the end of the war, the two princesses were quite grown up. Princess Elizabeth, heir to the throne, was 19. There was already considerable speculation about who she might marry. It was not generally known that throughout the war years, Princess Elizabeth had kept in touch with a young man she'd met many years earlier. With her mother's approval, of course. Just before the war, the royal family had paid a sentimental return visit to the King's Old School, the Naval College at Dartmouth, with unexpected consequences. For it was here that the 13-year-old Princess Elizabeth had a fateful meeting with one of the cadets chosen to escort the royal party. He was in fact a distant cousin, an 18-year-old cadet captain, Prince Philip of Greece. 8 years later, the princess had not forgotten her encounter with Philip. On the contrary, their relationship had matured to such an extent that during this royal visit to South Africa, the probability of marriage must have been very much on her mind. It was on this trip that the target of Princess Margaret's affections first came into focus. Also on board, as a query, was Wing Commander Peter Townsend, the married man who stole her affections. Margaret's romance lacked the happy ending. For Elizabeth, it was roses all the way.
And now they are man and wife. The princess had been in the abbey for nearly an hour. What followed the service was the ornate pageantry of a state occasion. It showed that this was no ordinary wedding, but that of a king's daughter. Following the bridal procession came the bride's father and mother, and behind them 5 kings, 5 queens, and 8 princes and princesses. Excitement was at its peak as the king, the queen, Queen Mary, and other members of the royal family came out to join them. Seldom has a bride and groom received such a tumultuous expression of goodwill. Inside the palace, the cameras were able to capture the exquisite workmanship of the bridal gown. Princess Margaret leads the 8 bridesmaids who have come to join the bridal pair. And now, with the king and queen to complete the family group, here are 3 generations of Europe's royal houses.
There was soon to be further cause for celebration, the King and Queen's Silver Jubilee.
At Temple Bar, the Lord Mayor presents the king with a ceremonial sword, ancient custom that grants the sovereign the right to enter the city. Many times have they driven along this route to receive their people's loyal greetings. But today it is different. None of the pomp and ceremony can hide the simple significance of it all. As the royal carriage draws up at St. Paul's, a husband and wife come to their parish church to give thanks for 25 years of happiness. Possessing within their family circle the secret of happily married life, the king and queen have given the people inspiration and youth an example. And it is the nation's children who are the first to greet them as they leave after the moving service. The pictures the whole world has waited for. A first look at Britain's month-old royal prince, Charles of Edinburgh. Sleeping peacefully through an hour of history, the infant prince has his 8 sponsors around him, after his baptism at Buckingham Palace. Only the third royal Charles in English history, his name, bestowed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, calls to mind the Queen's ties with Scotland.
Now surely, after years of anxiety and uncertainty, the Queen's joy was complete. Her first grandson, a new heir to the throne. But the Queen's happiness was short-lived. In 1952, following a painful illness, the King succumbed to lung cancer. He'd been a heavy smoker all his adult life and was only 56 when he died. It seems that the King's death came as a surprise to his subjects and his family. Medical bulletins on his health had been sketchy and misleading. The shock and sadness at his passing was genuine and profound. As Princess Margaret wrote to a friend, "We were such a very happy and close family, and we were so lucky to have countless lovely memories of my darling papa." The King's premature death meant that Prince Charles, then only 3, never knew his grandfather, and that the Queen Mother, only 51, could contemplate many years of widowhood and real doubt about the role she would play in the future.
The gentlemen-at-arms, bodyguard to the sovereign, mount guard. As the Queen's and Princess watch, the royal coffin is brought to the train, and the King leaves London, no more to return. The Queen gives place to the Queen Mother, and with her sister follows behind her father's coffin. At this moment, life is still, and there is silence in all the lands he held united in our Commonwealth. George VI passes into the keeping of the Church. From Sandringham to Windsor, the sad journey has run its course. Within the chapel, the last rites draw to their end, while without, regal in their splendor, lie mute tributes to the man so simple in his tastes. The King is laid to rest, and the majesty of death ends with a family beginning its life anew. A young queen takes over the burden of monarchy. To the Queen Mother, in this hour of sorrow goes the deep sympathy of all who honor the man now at rest in the chapel of St. George at Windsor.
Receive the rod of equity and mercy. Be so merciful that you be not too remiss. So execute justice that you forget not mercy. O God, the crown of the faithful, bless, we beseech thee, this crown, and so sanctify thy servant Elizabeth, upon whose head this day thou dost place it for a sign of royal majesty.
From the moment of her daughter's coronation, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, stepped back into the shadows to allow the spotlight to fall upon her daughter, the new Queen Elizabeth. It's no exaggeration to say that she recreated herself, emerging as that familiar and much-loved lady, the Queen Mother, known affectionately throughout the world as the Queen Mum. Only perhaps on the 50th anniversary of D-Day did we recall that our favourite granny had once rallied the nation to arms.
I do hope that all those who go to the many ceremonies arranged will remember with pride and gratitude those men and women, armed and unarmed, whose courage and foresight rarely helped to bring us to victory. God bless them all.
As the Queen Mum joined her two daughters on the balcony at Buckingham Palace in 1995 to commemorate D-Day, it's hard to imagine her emotions. The cheering crowds, the martial music, the adulation. She'd seen it all before and joined in singing the same patriotic songs. It must have reminded her of that time long ago when Hitler regarded her as the most dangerous woman in Europe. When far from being the nation's favourite grandmother, she was the battling Queen Consort, a brave and determined woman whose courage helped to hold king, people and country together.